All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our workshop. For those of you who are new here, my name is Hannah Jennings, and I'm a community organizer at Tech in Motion. As some of you may know, over a decade ago, Tech in Motion was founded by Motion Recruitment, staffing and recruiting firm, with the mission to connect and empower the tech community. I'm thrilled to welcome you to today's Tech Career Workshop. We have an incredible lineup of speakers and sessions. Throughout the workshop, you'll have the opportunity to explore 5 different sessions, each focusing on a unique tech topic. There really is a little something for everyone. So if you scroll down below, you'll see all the upcoming sessions. You can jump between sessions as they open, so feel free to dive into the ones that interest you most. As you see on the screen, the Join Session button will turn purple when a session goes live, and we'll also be sending reminders in the chat. So don't worry if you can't make it to every session. Each session will be recorded, and we'll circulate those following the event. So let's kick off by sharing which sessions you all are joining and what you're most excited to see in the chat. And then I'll turn it over to Chris Walek and Greg Olsen, Executive Directors at Motion Recruitment, who will kick off today's workshop with some insights on how to future-proof your tech career. Welcome, Chris and Greg.
Thank you.
Hey everyone. Definitely super excited to be kicking this event off for us. It's actually my favorite time of year in recruiting because we get to launch our tech salary guide, but we really intensively look back at the year we just had, and we get to figure out what trends we saw. You know, we all know in technology and just the modern age, things move really fast. We're always needing to update, and we get to actually deliver a lot of what we see to our community. And so it's a really fun time of year. I'd say, I think Greg will agree with me, 2024 was probably the most interesting year that I've ever done this. We had a really unique landscape to navigate economically, and then you combine that with the emergence of AI, which could very well be, you know, kind of our generation's typewriter, which really changes the way that a lot of things work. So I think this topic of this event was just coming at a perfect time, and I hope everyone really enjoys the sessions today. So Greg and I have actually worked together for well over 20 years combined, doing tech recruiting nationally. I think the thing we get asked like the most by engineers is just what the future demand is going to be, right? And that's why we talk about future proofing and upskilling. So we're going to shed some light on that, but I obviously want to let Greg introduce himself first, and then we'll get into it.
Yes, thank you, Chris. Good to see everyone. Thanks for having us, and also thank you, Tech in Motion, for putting this on. I agree. Me and Chris have done this job for eons. I would definitely say this year, you know, while it's hard to say this has been the craziest, it might be the craziest yet. It definitely had a bunch of different challenges, specifically with the topic of upskilling, which we're going to talk about. I think what's very cool about this topic and what makes it so important is, you know, for people that are listening right now, this is relevant if you are just leaving school and you are first basically entering the tech industry. This is obviously relevant to someone who is actively looking for a job now. But even if you are listening and you are gainfully employed, you have no thoughts of even looking for a job right now, but you are just basically so, conscious about like what's going to help me, not just next year, but for years to come. Well, hopefully we can kind of get through with this idea and this kind of through going through like steps you can apply for upskilling. It can be something that whenever these crazy times happen, like this year obviously was, you can basically view this going into something that has some sense of excitement to it instead of something where you feel like you are just at the mercy of anything that changes. So that's what we're going to get out of this. That's what we're going to hopefully talk about with you guys. Chris, before we talk about that, I wanted to start out and basically talk more about just as we look into 2025, basically what you felt like made this year so interesting, you know, and specifically for me, where all of my office's focus is in Washington, D.C. I would assume this was nationally, but for here, you know, it seemed like not even for the last 12 months, but maybe even longer, there was this real sense of almost definitely anxiety, but a lot of companies almost waiting for someone else to make the first move. You know, if it was reductions in force, if it was actually trying to use AI, what does that even mean? There was this real sense of almost like, well, I'll wait and see what my competitor does or what my, someone that's close to me might be doing. And that really led to this like feeling of almost like stagnation leading into, I think almost everyone was putting off like, we'll get to this as we get to 2025. And then you mix in elections, you mix in craziness in the market, everything else. Like there were so many things that basically almost stalled stuff. When you think about this year, like what stood out the most in terms of just what made it so unique?
So for this year and looking into next year, I definitely would say AI made this year the most unique. If I had to pick one thing, the emergence of AI operating in almost every system we have, and it put it was exciting and it solves a lot of issues, but it also created a lot of uncertainty in the hiring market and a lot of doubt for, was this resume written by a person? Is this code written by a person, right? Is what we're pushing out live code written by a person? And then it's like, is that even okay? Why do we care if this code is working and it's effective? Then why should it matter if a person wrote it or a machine, right? So, and I think prompt engineering is kind of one of those things I was going to mention as a skill where, AI, I believe, is really, it's a tool. And I've seen people use it poorly and I've seen people use it correctly. And it's something that is certainly going to be part of modern work, especially in tech. And it takes practice, right? I've spent a lot of time seeing what different results come out by the way that you prompt it. And it's not something that I think is just going to come naturally to everybody. So I think 2024, that would be my answer. The thing I would say generally in the tech market, and when people ask me about upskilling, I think it's an interesting word. It's that I want to be better and I want to be more demanded. And in 2025, what I'm noticing or projecting as a trend, and I've kind of already started seeing it, is that companies are being hyper specific in the needs that they have. So following these tech cycles that we have, when a company's hiring, and this is why, one of the things I'm passionate about is a job description is almost useless because it's a list of buzzwords typically, but it's not specifically, we have this current problem that you're going to be coming over here and dealing with. The specific tools you use, I think, is less relevant. And the challenge in 2025 is, as an engineer, how am I going to highlight to a company what I've really accomplished? And I think we're going to shift away from, I'm good with XYZ technology into, I have successfully migrated this. I updated a legacy application and got into microservices, right? And I think it's becoming actually less reliant on specific tools and more reliant, the jobs that are open and available are more reliant on specific experience that an individual has. And so the challenge is going to be matching that, where how do I demonstrate my efficiency with these things through a resume, through my LinkedIn, right, to the person that is doing recruiting with me. So that's kind of the trend, I would say, that fits upskilling in 2025. It's really not necessarily a skill, but actually communication of what you can do, the value that you can bring in an organization. And I think that's going to be really challenging, actually, is that communication, especially because of the systems that we rely on. You think about how I read job descriptions and resumes all day. A lot of them look the same. Those are very, very different people, very, very different companies with very different needs. And then you start to see that in the interview process, right? Most people that interview are not hired, right? So, okay, well, we're not doing a very good job of highlighting the exact skills. And I think 2025 is potentially going to be the highest demand for really pinpointing that we've ever seen.
So all really good points. When you think about, so specifically this topic of upscaling, and say I'm thinking about either transitioning into what my job is going to be in 2025, or just what I can anticipate within technology, what my job is going to be. For me, they're like the must-have skills that you're seeing people talking about, or just in general, like if you're actually looking at how you take what you just said and how companies are approaching this within hiring, like if someone was asking for advice on like, what do I need to be showing, or what skills do I need to try to be gathering? what would you actually say to them about that?
So I love this question, and it's a different answer for everybody because technology is, it's so many things. It's impossible to be the expert at all of them. I think about doctors a lot, right? Doctors probably have general knowledge on many things, but a lot of them pick a specialty. And when you're dealing with something acute, you go to the specialist. And I think a lot of engineers will gravitate towards their specialty. The first thing that I ask folks is I call it the look in the mirror. So when you're going to upskill, if you want to know maybe what's going to be most demanded, the first thing I say is, well, what are you getting reached out to about the most, right? And, LinkedIn is usually the most popular place for it. It's what it exists for, is here's what I've done and, what's out there, and do you want to hire me and let me stay in touch with my network? And so if you do, I know it can be time intensive, but I think it's worth the time to see what people think of your profile, right? What are people reaching out to you about? Let's say, I'm a really, really good back-end engineer and I keep getting pitched, design roles, right? Like, oh, it's interesting. Now, yes, LinkedIn has a lot of imperfections, and I think a lot of recruiters are doing blanket searches and spamming things out. But go through it, because you're coming up in a search for that. And then it might take you reviewing your LinkedIn profile and saying, hold on, I do have this word a lot, or you know what, I haven't actually been working with this as much. And so I've always told people, really good exercise to prepare how you present yourself outwardly to the network is build your resume every 6 months or a year. And you'll start to write down the things that you're proud of that you've built in the last 6 months. And what you're going to end up doing with that exercise is replacing certain things. You're going to say, oh, you know what, this was cool at the time, but actually this is cooler. I think part of where people struggle is when they're thinking about what's the future going to hold and what do people want from me is, okay, I've been at this great job for 3 to 4 years. Something happened, right? And I want to go on the market. And then you're sitting in front of your resume and you're like, how do I communicate the last 3 to 4 years of my work? And it's either 7 pages long because you're so proud of everything, or it's too short and you forget your accomplishments that people want to hear about. So that's kind of the first place I start. It's a good question, Greg, but I take the first kind of look in the mirror approach.
Yeah, I think, I don't know if you've seen this in Philadelphia, but I think as companies definitely got more specific with what they were looking for, I've also seen, and even you could say selective with who they're hiring. I think the ideal goal that companies have tried to basically fill, or that I've at least been seeing, is, can this person fill at least 1.5 jobs I have? Obviously, there's their core job, but then what else within my environment can this person do? And I think when you think about upskilling, I think another good practice, and this can even come from when you're doing your resume every few months and really thinking about that, I would think about what is the next closest job that is impacted by my job? Like if it was, what am I closest basically to? And you don't have to be an expert in that, but I would actually think about how do I basically brand myself as having exposure to both these things? Because when I look at a lot of the placements we've done, so many data engineers we've helped out are doing half their time doing DevOps and deployment. A lot of really good software engineers and front-end developers are being asked to assist with project management, even product management. And we've seen this happen before, but I think especially if your goal long-term is to have hopefully full-time employment, but also something that feels stable, there's always going to be a place for an expert in 1 or 2 things, and if you are an expert at React or design or insert anything, there's always going to be a need for that. But you have to just protect yourself from companies identifying just someone who's great at this one thing, being someone that will come in as a contractor or fill this one specific need. And I think this goes for not just technology, this is like everything, but I think really trying to broaden out between this is 1A, what I'm best at, but also I need to try to have exposure into this other area or this side domain, because, I think AI can be a catch-all for everything. And unfortunately, that's like a catch-all for data science. And if you're not doing that right now, I don't know if the best advice is, just go learn that, because that's equally competitive, that's really, really hard, you're still going to have those same needs in your environment, but it's just how do I basically brand myself as more than just this one thing? If that makes sense at all.
It does. And that's, I think, why so many people were interested in this event is what direction do I go?
Yeah.
I have a good analogy for this. That I often say the fallacy of the engineer is the same problem with a startup. So when you're running a startup, you love your idea. It's such a good idea, and you just keep building it. And you have so many other concepts you can tag off of this one idea. And then the next thing you do, and the first most important hire that I always tell my startup clients to make is a product manager. Because a product manager is going to be the person to say, stop building that. No one's going to pay for it. This is your baby. And it's funny because when I talk to engineers, their side projects are like, oh, I'm building this thing in Lua, right? Or like, well, I really love Rust, and I've been building this thing in Rust. I actually think we'll see Rust more in production in 2025 than any year before. But it's like it's too much excitement for just I enjoy this and I wanted to do something new, which is what makes an engineer great. And I think we need to be product managers of our career a little bit more. And the best way that I've seen that be done is just be active in your community, right? What's your buddy doing at the company that you left, right? What direction did they go to, or what are your friends from college doing? What are they seeing out there? Because it's really hard when I see, news articles on LinkedIn, and I actually think they do a good job. It's really hard to nail down macro trends in engineering, just like I believe it is in medicine. I think macro trends are difficult for people to really learn from. I think they're good to be aware of. But for me in my career and what's going to be demanded of me, I want to go ask people that are just kind of in the sector that I'm in. And maybe I ask 5 people who, let's say they're 5 data engineers, right? To your example, they're probably doing data engineering 5 different ways in some capacity. And it's like, okay, well, what did you like and hate about that? What did you like and hate about that? And I think just right there will give you maybe a direction or a passion project. You say, all right, I would do this. Let me go do it at my home lab, right? Let me see how that would work and start to kind of like experiment with it instead of just, building random stuff in Lua because you think it's cool that, is probably not something that someone is going to pitch you a job requiring, at least not in today's day and age. And then my last point, and you would probably say the same thing, Greg, is it's always a good idea, self-plug to have people like me and you in the back pocket because our job is to talk to hundreds of companies about specific disciplines. And we can certainly guide anyone in our network towards, based on where you want to go, these would be the skills that, I've gotten the most demand for in the last 12 months sort of thing.
Yeah, I would say if it comes to putting this idea of like upskilling in practice, I think, again, it is a shameless plug, but I think it's also important picking a recruiter that you trust. And even if you're not looking, but just asking that person like, hey, if I was like, what even types of interviews could I get right now? Could I even get interviews? Like, what are you seeing? Even things like that to be aware of. It's so much better to just not have to be reactionary if these things happen. So I think that's awesome. I would also use those people to really see which industries and which even trends that they actually think you should be aware of. Because again, while every industry was basically impacted in some way over the last 12 to 24 months, not all industries are impacted the exact same. And some are inevitably going to do good. Some are inevitably going to struggle more at certain times, and just making sure that you're even set up, like skill set aside, that your company is actually set up to be in a good position. It's equally as important. And then I think also when it comes to this, the awareness piece, really looking at your skill set and thinking about where else it might be either a blind spot or what do I need to work on. There are so many good, almost free resources to be able to do this, whether that's proactively learning this. I think any ways that you can try to gain these skills without feeling like you have to spend a bunch of money to do it. There's never a one fix all to basically do this. It's an awareness, it's a discovery, it's a learning process. But again, it's having this habit of like, I'm going to follow these steps from now until basically I retire, because we know stuff's going to change. We're going to have a different conversation in 3 years. that's going to be totally different, but it's going to follow the same sort of core ideas that's there. So anything else you're thinking before kind of we wrap up and kind of let the other events kick off?
It's we could talk about this for days, and we do. And you made some good points. No, I think that those are kind of the simple advice. Hopefully it was clear of where people should go kind of directionally and what avenues to look for. I like the word awareness. I think that's a key piece. And if you don't know, ask. If you don't know the value of your skill set, ask, or simply do some research. ChatGPT does have a lot of data. Hey, how many postings are there with the word security in it versus C#, for example, right? Or you can go on Indeed a lot of time, even though not every position is posted. I think it's actually only about 60% are posted, but you can still do kind of from a macro lens, how much demand are there for certain toolings, certain industries, how many senior positions are there versus mid-level positions, whatever it might be. And just stay active in the community, do stuff like this. I mean, this is an awesome event that, literally hundreds of people are a part of. And I think the breakout sessions are going to be fantastic. So we don't want to steal too much of the show. We can certainly get everyone off to their sessions.
Yeah. And then last thing, I know there's a couple questions that people threw into the chat. We'll work with basically our side and see basically how we can try to get some of these answered as well. And then if you guys want to continue this conversation, whether with us directly, if you ever have questions or advice or want us to point you in the direction of someone within Motion that could help you out, please feel free to connect with Chris or I on LinkedIn. Our emails are probably able to be found through here. And then again, we'll try to get to even some of these questions too, because again, I think just having these conversations, it makes something that feels inherently scary, which change is always scary. It can also make it exciting. And there's a lot of good stuff that we can all kind of learn from each other. So.
Well said. Thank you guys for the time.
Yeah. Thank you.